What if I told you that a single senator could hold the entire US government at a standstill? Sound like a plot from a political thriller? It's actually a real-world scenario made possible by the filibuster. Let's explore how this powerful tool works and why it's so controversial. The filibuster is a legislative tactic used in the US Senate to extend debate on a bill, delay a vote, or prevent a bill from being brought to a vote. It's a procedural tool that senators can effectively use to block or slow down legislation or other matters like nominations that are under consideration. The filibuster as a tactic of extended debate to delay or block legislation is not explicitly mentioned in the rules of the United States Senate. Rather, it arises from the Senate's rule that allows for unlimited debate and the lack of a rule to force a vote on a motion or a piece of legislation. The key rule that indirectly enables the filibuster is Rule 19, Debate. This rule addresses the conduct of debate in the Senate, permitting unlimited debate on legislative business unless a cloture motion is invoked. Since there's no inherent time limit on speeches or debate under this rule, senators can theoretically speak indefinitely, which forms the basis of the filibuster. The procedure to end a filibuster, known as cloture, is explicitly provided for in the Senate rules. Rule 22 establishes the process for invoking cloture, requiring 60 senators to end debate on a pending matter. The filibuster was used during the very first session of the United States Senate when, in September 1789, Senators Richard Henry Lee and William Grayson of Virginia used the tactic to block legislation that would have designated Philadelphia, Pennsylvania as the nation's capital. In addition to Grayson and Lee's filibuster, several other historical examples of the filibuster are noteworthy. Senator Strom Thurmond of South Carolina conducted the longest solo filibuster in history, speaking for 24 hours and 18 minutes against the Civil Rights Act of 1957. Senator Alphonse D'Amato of New York was well known for two lengthy filibusters, one in 1986 against a military bill for 23 hours and 30 minutes, and another in 1992 for 15 hours against a tax bill. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky filibustered for 12 hours and 52 minutes against the nomination of John Brennan as CIA director, raising concerns about U.S. drone policy. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas spoke for over 21 hours in an effort to defund the Affordable Care Act. In 2010, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont held the floor for 8 hours and 37 minutes in opposition to a proposed extension of tax cuts implemented during the George W. Bush administration, discussing the problem of growing income inequality in the United States. And Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut led a 14-hour filibuster to force votes on gun control measures in the wake of the Orlando nightclub shooting in 2016. But the procedure was infrequently used in the early years of the Republic. While it's difficult to track the exact usage over time, we can observe that the number of cloture motions, that is, the number of times the Senate has used the parliamentary procedure to try and end debate and vote on a measure, has increased dramatically over time. On this graph, the blue line represents the number of times a cloture motion was made in a given Congress, while the orange line shows how many times such motions were successful. And we can see from this that, beginning with the 65th session of Congress, which ran from 1917 to 1918 when the cloture process was introduced, and running through the late 1960s, the motion to end debate was used quite infrequently. But beginning in the late 1960s, things begin to change, and the filibuster and corresponding cloture motions become increasingly used to block Senate business. Several institutional changes can explain the reason for the increasing use of the filibuster over time. First, the process for filibustering itself has changed. Before the 1970s, a senator wishing to filibuster had to physically take the Senate floor and speak continuously to prevent the bill from moving forward. But after the mid-1970s, the silent filibuster became more common. Under the silent filibuster, senators can prevent action on a bill simply by indicating their desire to hold legislation, at which point the Senate leadership could assess whether or not cloture could be invoked. This effectively made the process of filibustering easier to accomplish. Around the same time, the Senate also adopted a two-track system, which permitted the Senate to set aside the measure being filibustered and move on to other legislative activities. Prior to this, a filibuster prevented the Senate from moving forward on any business whatsoever. This change limited the impact of the filibuster, but ironically also sparked increased usage as it became politically more convenient for the minority to sustain. And in 1975, the Senate revised its cloture rule so that 3/5 of senators duly chosen and sworn could limit debate, effectively establishing a 60-vote threshold to end debate. Before that, Senate rules required a 2/3 majority of those present and voting to invoke cloture. The net effect of this change was to make it easier to sustain a filibuster, as senators did not need to be physically present on the Senate floor to prevent business from moving forward. And in more recent years, growing political polarization has led to increased use of the filibuster by lessening the cost and perhaps even increasing the value of blocking legislation favored by the majority party. The increased use of the filibuster has impacted the work of the Senate, most obviously by slowing the legislative process and increasing the number of bills failed. In the 1950s, the Senate passed about a quarter of all bills introduced to the body. In recent years, it's passed less than 5%. This is because, in essence, the filibuster requires a 60-vote supermajority for the Senate to conduct most business. In a closely divided country, it's uncommon for either side to garner that level of nationwide support. As a result, the Senate is less able to conduct its normal business. This, in part, has led to a greater focus on executive action and judicial appointments in the Senate, both of which can bypass the filibuster. Both parties recognize the power of the tool when in the minority, and thus want to maintain it. But when in the majority, both sides have expressed frustration with the process and have developed avenues to bypass it. One such tool is budget reconciliation. While originally developed as a budgeting tool in the 1970s, the budget reconciliation process was developed to reconcile government funding levels in the current fiscal year. But because the process bypasses the Senate's filibuster rules, it's increasingly been used to pass budget-related matters. This tool can generally only be used about once per year, and any matter included in the bill must be connected to federal spending, revenue, or the federal debt limit. But even within these restrictions, the budget reconciliation process has been used to pass portions of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, in 2006, the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, the COVID-19 Relief Package in 2021, and the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, among others. Most executive and judicial appointments are also exempt from the filibuster, requiring only a simple majority of the vote of the Senate to confirm. This exemption developed over time. In 2013, then Democratic Majority Leader Harry Reid altered the rules of the Senate to permit appointments to the executive branch and the courts other than the U.S. Supreme Court to be made by a simple majority vote of the Senate. Republicans followed suit in 2017 when then Republican Majority Leader Mitch McConnell eliminated the filibuster for Supreme Court appointments, clearing the way for the confirmation of Neil Gorsuch to the court. Finally, several other rulemaking statutes set conditions under which senatorial action can bypass the filibuster. For example, the Congressional Review Act allows Congress to review and repeal certain administrative regulations adopted by the executive branch by a simple majority vote. Similarly, action under the War Powers Act, which we consider in another video, is also not subject to the filibuster, nor is action undertaken by the Senate on international trade deals or the debt limit. In short, the filibuster is seen by some as a tool for protecting the rights of the minority in the Senate, ensuring that significant legislation cannot be passed without broad consensus. At the same time, others criticize it for allowing a small number of senators to obstruct legislation supported by the majority, leading to legislative gridlock. And which side people fall on in the debate is often a function of whether their preferred party controls the Senate or not. But that's it for now. Please leave any questions you have in the comments section below, and thanks for watching.